I remember the moment as if time had paused. The casket was closing. The priest was still speaking about peace and closure, but I wasn't really listening anymore. Not because I didn't care, I cared too much. My mind was clouded, my heart shattered. My son David was gone. He was only 33, a heart attack out of nowhere. One moment we were texting about what to cook on Sunday. The next, I was picking out the tie he'd wear for the last time. And as I sat there, clutching the funeral program, trying to breathe through the unbearable stillness, I felt her behind me, so close I could feel the warmth of her breath. And then she whispered, "You have 1 week to get out." I didn't move, I didn't turn around. My fingers crushed the edges of the program unconsciously. I kept my eyes on the casket as if somehow not reacting would undo what I'd just heard. But nothing could undo it. Her name is Marissa, my daughter-in-law, widow of my only child, and apparently the woman who had already decided that grief came second and real estate came first. She squeezed my shoulder gently like it was some kind of condolence. But I knew that wasn't comfort. That was dismissal. Dismissal disguised as kindness. That was the first thread of the story I'm about to tell you. And if you've ever been betrayed not by a stranger but by someone you once called family, then you might understand why I stayed quiet. And why, eventually, I chose not to. They say grief comes in waves. But what they don't tell you is that betrayal comes in silence, not crashing but creeping. After the funeral, I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I was listening, watching, gathering the shape of what Marissa was trying to do. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen of the house I had helped build, not with my hands, but with every penny I had left after my husband passed away. Back then, David had just lost his job and they were desperate to buy a home. I remember writing the cashier's check like it was yesterday. No hesitation, just a mother helping her son. David had insisted. "Your name goes on the deed, Mom. This is your home too." I never argued, I just smiled because the gesture meant more than the paper, or so I thought. Marissa was already in the kitchen that morning, typing fast on her laptop with a mug of almond milk coffee by her side. She didn't look up when I entered. "Morning," she said, still typing. "I'm just checking quotes for moving companies." The words didn't quite land. "I didn't ask for movers," I said. She smiled without looking up. "Right. But you said you'd need time, so I thought I'd get ahead of things." Get ahead of things? It was like watching someone redecorate a grave before the flowers had even wilted. I opened the fridge. My labeled containers were gone, replaced by perfectly stacked Tupperware in muted beige. I didn't recognize a single one. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there absorbing what she was doing, systematically erasing me, quietly replacing me, making sure I got the message even if she never said the words again. Later that day, I noticed something missing from the living room. David's recliner. It wasn't just a chair, it was his chair. The one he watched Sunday football in. The one he napped in after working double shifts. The one he'd bought with his first paycheck after military service. "Where's the recliner?" I asked, my voice calm, even. Marissa looked up from her phone. "It didn't fit the room anymore. I had it picked up this morning." My hands went cold. "It's been 1 week." She put her phone down. "It's been 9 days, and I'm not going to sit in a dead man's chair, Ellen." That was the first time she said his name since the funeral. And it sounded like a burden, not a loss. That night, I opened the closet in my room, the one I had used for 7 years. My drawers were half empty. My jewelry box was gone. And inside one bin labeled Mom's stuff, I found my papers shuffled, some files missing. I checked the box under my bed, the one that held my folder of old records. Gone. That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a mission. And it had started the moment the casket closed. The next day, I called a lawyer David had recommended years ago, Mr. Holt. He was kind, sharp-eyed, and remembered David right away. "Solid man," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss." I explained everything, the whispers, the missing documents, the tension in the house, and most importantly, that my name was on the original deed. He leaned forward. "Do you have any proof you contributed to the down payment?" "I used a cashier's check. I still have the receipt." His eyes lit up. "Then we may have something." I drove home with my heart racing, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. When I got back, Marissa was pacing near the hallway, phone in hand. "No, she doesn't know anything," she whispered. "It's handled." She froze when she saw me, then smiled. I said nothing. I went straight to the attic. David had stored boxes there before they got married, old files, taxes, school stuff. I climbed up, coughing through the dust, digging through box after box until I found it. Home Purchase Docs 2016. And there it was. A manila folder, labeled Final Deed. I opened it. My name, my signature, David's, dated, notarized, filed. It was real. It had always been real, which meant Marissa was bluffing or hoping I'd forget. She didn't know what I had just found, and she didn't know I wasn't afraid anymore. That night she came in with 2 glasses of wine. I figured we should talk, she said, clear the air. I took the glass but didn't drink. She sat across from me on the couch, looked down, softened her voice. I know things have been tense, but David always said this house was for our future family. I hope you understand. I said nothing. Then I asked, have you spoken to a lawyer? She blinked. No, I didn't think it was necessary. I smiled, maybe it is. Her lips twitched. Are you threatening me, Ellen? No, I said, still smiling. Just thinking out loud. She stood, clearly unsettled. I hope we can do this the easy way. I nodded, so do I. She walked down the hall and I opened my phone, scanned the deed, created a folder, labeled it for lawyer only. She had made her move, now it was my turn. The days that followed felt like a dance where only one person knew the choreography. Marissa moved gracefully around the house, pouring tea, folding towels, playing the part of the grieving widow. But I could see the cracks in her mask now. She was no longer just reorganizing, she was strategizing. In every step she took, I took note. On the 3rd morning, I found my nightstand drawer locked. It had never been locked before. Inside that drawer, I used to keep my prescription pills, my small envelope of emergency cash, and a notebook with passwords and old letters. All of it gone. I used a flathead screwdriver to pry it open. Empty. Nothing but a few dust lines. It wasn't just invasion, it was a message. You have no privacy here anymore. I didn't react, I didn't confront. I walked into David's old office and opened his filing cabinet. 3rd drawer down, I found a folder labeled refinance options. Inside were newer mortgage documents signed within the last year. My name was still there. Hers never appeared. That mattered. That really mattered. I snapped photos of every page and backed them up to a cloud folder. I was starting to understand this wasn't just about kicking me out. Marissa was playing for ownership, and I wasn't going to let her win. That afternoon, I overheard her talking on the phone. She was in the hallway, not even trying to whisper this time. Yeah, she's still here, she said. It's awkward, but she doesn't have any real claim. No, her name's not on the utilities or tax bills. It'll be fine. I stepped into the hallway just loudly enough to let her know I was listening. She turned, startled, then recovered with a fake smile. Everything okay? She asked. I said, you really should be careful what you say in this house. The walls are thin. Then I walked into the kitchen and made coffee like nothing had happened. But everything was happening, every minute of every day. This wasn't my home anymore, it was a battlefield. Quiet, subtle, but sharp. And Marissa was fighting with paperwork, charm, and deceit. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I gathered my own army of proof. That evening, I made copies of everything I had so far, the deed, the refinance documents, the photos, the email threads. I printed them, stored them in a binder, uploaded them again to another cloud drive. Gave one copy to my lawyer. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being prepared. 3 nights later, I heard footsteps outside my room. Slow, deliberate, not passing by, pausing. I pressed my ear to the door. No knock, no sound. Then the steps retreated. In the morning, I found my alarm clock blinking. Power had gone out, but only for 1 minute. Circuit breaker was untouched. I didn't ask questions. I just noted the pattern: intimidation. Soft, silent. Calculated. The next day, I went back to Mr. Holt with my new documents. We sat across from each other in his quiet office. Light filtered through the blinds. I laid everything out. He reviewed the refinance forms and the notarized deed. When he looked up, his voice was calm but firm. She has no legal standing. I exhaled. If she tries to evict you, we'll respond immediately, he said. In fact, I recommend we pre-file a declaration of shared ownership. That way, if she attempts anything, the court already has your claim. I nodded. What's my risk? I asked. Only if you lose your documents. Or let her bait you into reacting. I understood what that meant. Stay calm, stay smart, stay quiet. When I got home that evening, something was different. The tension in the air had shifted. Marissa greeted me with a strange warmth. offered me coffee, even asked how I was feeling. I smiled and answered politely, but I knew she felt it, the control slipping. She didn't know I had already filed with the court. She didn't know my documents were already protected. And when she made small talk about rearranging the guest room or redecorating the dining area, I just listened. Because her words weren't about interior design, they were about power. Every smile was a check for weakness. Every question was a test, but I didn't flinch. Then came the bombshell. 3 days later, she called it a grief gathering. Erin's coworkers, a few neighbors, some of her Pilates friends. A little closure, she said over almond milk and soft jazz in the kitchen. I said nothing. But I watched as she pulled out David's old bar cart, now stocked with wine and imported crackers like it was a birthday brunch. I watched her stand near the fireplace, giving toasts about love and loss, all while the bookshelf where David's favorite books once stood was now filled with faux succulents and decorative glass. She didn't just want the house. She wanted the history erased. One of the guests, a woman I'd never met, turned to me and asked gently, "And how are you doing, Mrs. Hart?" I smiled, as well as I can be, considering I still live here. She blinked. "Oh. I thought Marissa said this was her house." I kept my smile. Easy mistake. Marissa was watching across the room, her smile still fixed but her eyes sharp. She came over not long after. "Can I speak with you?" she asked, cool and quiet. I followed her to the hallway. She closed the door. "Are you trying to start something?" she asked. I answered a question honestly. "Don't play games, Ellen. These people don't need to hear about legal paperwork. Then maybe don't host cocktail parties in a house you're trying to erase him from." Her face flushed. "If you don't want to be here," she whispered, "you're free to leave." I smiled. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere." That night I heard her again on the phone in the guest room. "If she finds that file, we're screwed," she whispered. I didn't need to find the file anymore because I already had it. She just didn't know it. The truth is, Marissa thought I was predictable. She thought grief would make me passive, that age meant weakness. That if she tightened the noose slowly enough, I'd walk myself out the door. What she didn't know is, I've lived too long to mistake kindness for surrender. And I've lost too much to be afraid of a woman who hides behind smiles. That night after the grief gathering, I noticed something strange in her tote bag. A manila folder, slightly open, just enough to reveal labels written in that same perfect handwriting she used on the fake sympathy cards. One tab read, "Doc Copy's backup plan." I didn't touch it, but later that night while she was in the shower humming some haunting melody that reminded me of theater more than sorrow, I stepped into the hallway. Quiet, calculated. I opened the bag just enough to take photos, not the documents themselves. I didn't need to steal, I just needed proof that she was hoarding secrets. One folder said, "E-signatures 2023. Another, "Will revised final." My heart dropped. David had passed away in February. The file was labeled March. I stared at that date, barely breathing. David couldn't have signed anything in March, because by then he was already gone. Back in my room, I sent the photos to Mr. Holt. 10 minutes later, he called. "She's forging documents," he said, "and doing a sloppy job of it." I stayed silent. Then I asked what happens next. "We request a subpoena," he said. "Full discovery of her digital files. If there's proof she falsified signatures or tampered with estate planning, this moves from a civil dispute to fraud." I nodded into the silence. "And if she faked it all? Then she's committed a crime. And if you keep documenting this quietly, calmly, we'll win before we ever enter a courtroom." So I did just that. I kept quiet. I cleaned the bathroom. I folded laundry. I let her believe I was still vulnerable while she whispered about the baby. Yes, the baby. 2 days after the folder incident, I found her in the kitchen in a robe, holding a tissue, staring out the window like she was auditioning for a midday drama. When I walked in, she turned slowly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure," she said softly, then placed her hand on her belly. "I'm pregnant." My breath caught. 8 weeks, maybe 9. David had been gone for 10. I did the math in my head. She didn't flinch. She placed a sonogram photo on the table, sliding it toward me like a poker chip. I picked it up. Clinic name, her name, date. 4 weeks ago, my chest burned. She was lying, and it wasn't just a lie, it was a tactic. She wasn't carrying David's child. She was staging a legal narrative, a grieving widow, an expectant mother. A woman fighting for stability for her unborn child. I said nothing. I didn't react. I handed her the photo back and walked out. That night, I forwarded the image and the folder photo from earlier to Mr. Holt. His reply came quick. This helps. We can force her to submit medical proof. If she's lying, we catch her. If she's not, we reveal the timeline. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door, typed, sealed. Urgent 48-hour notice to vacate. No court stamp, no lawyer's name, just legal-sounding words arranged like theater. I opened it. Inside was a letter accusing me of emotional instability, disruption of grief, and threatening to file elder neglect charges if I didn't vacate. That's when I knew she wasn't playing chess anymore, she was swinging blind. I took the letter, folded it neatly, placed it in a folder with everything else, then I drove back to Holt's office. No appointment. Just walked in, dropped the file on his desk. He read the last line, then leaned back in his chair, half chuckling in disbelief. She's accusing you of elder abuse, he said, while you're the one being manipulated, intimidated, and financially frozen out. I told him everything. The drawer, the pills, the missing money, the pregnancy timing, the false will, the overheard phone calls. His face hardened. This is beyond property, he said. She's forging identity and altering financial documents. If we can tie this to her digital footprint, we're heading into criminal charges. I exhaled slowly, not fear, focus. That afternoon, I went to a local print shop, made 3 bound copies of everything, one for the safe deposit box, one for Holt's office, one for my closet floorboard. The file's spine read, case file, Marissa. When I returned home, she was on a video call, headset on, laughing. Yeah, I'll have access to the place in 2 weeks tops, she said. I froze behind the hallway wall. She wasn't just trying to win the house. She was trying to flip it. I stepped into the room. She ended the call quickly, then looked at me. Need something? I said, just a heads up. If another envelope shows up at my door, make sure it's court stamped. Anything else goes to my attorney. She blinked. You threatening me again? No, I said, you started the paperwork war. I'm just keeping mine legal. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened David's old email. He had once given me the password when we were job hunting together. I tried it again. It worked. Inside, buried in a flagged folder labeled estate, I found something. A file. Draft will Feb 2023, PDF. It listed Marissa as sole heir with no mention of me. Signed, notarized, filed allegedly a week before his death. But the metadata created on Marissa's laptop, the signature, copied and reused from an older form, and the notary seal, blurry, cropped, not real. I sent the file to Mr. Holt. With one line, she forged his will. His reply came within 5 minutes. We're filing today. The morning after I sent the forged will to Holt, I didn't sleep in. I didn't cry. I didn't rehearse a speech or plan my next move. Because for the first time since David's death, I didn't need to fight alone. I had the law and, more importantly, the truth on my side now. That afternoon, I got a call from Holt's office. A court filing had been made, a motion to freeze any attempts to transfer, sell, or refinance the house. We had requested a full review of the will's validity and an alert placed on the property. We don't need her permission anymore, Holt said. From now on, the court speaks for you. When I returned home, the air in the house had changed. Not the quiet kind, not peace, but pressure, like static waiting to strike. Marissa was humming in the kitchen too cheerfully. She offered to make lunch, asked if I wanted to help her shop for baby things. Her words were all syrup. But her eyes were searching. She knew, she didn't know what, but she felt the shift. And she tilted her head and asked, "Are we good?" I smiled, "We'll see." Later that evening, while she was out buying candles and flavored water for another healing ceremony, I got a call from a process server. "We'll be delivering papers to Miss Marissa C," he said. "Do not engage, just observe." I said, "Trust me, I won't say a word." And I didn't. I just sat on the couch with a mug of tea and waited. At 5:07 p.m., her car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out with 2 shopping bags and a look of triumph on her face. A man in a gray jacket appeared from a sedan parked a few houses down. He walked up the steps, called her by full name, and handed her a thick envelope. She blinked, surprised. "What is this?" "You've been served," he said. "Probate fraud and property injunction." Then he walked away, no drama, no threats. Just law handed to her like a mirror. She stood frozen on the porch, clutching the envelope as if it were burning her hands. Then she turned toward the house. Her eyes locked onto mine through the window. I didn't blink, didn't smile. Didn't flinch. She stormed inside, slammed the envelope onto the dining table, tore it open, and whispered, "No, no, no, no." Then louder, "She's lying. This is all lies." She looked up at me, voice sharp. "What did you tell them?" I stood. I didn't tell them anything. I walked over and picked up the scattered pages. The documents did. She stormed into the kitchen, muttering to herself, "I'll fix this. This isn't happening." But the war she had choreographed in the shadows was now public, on record, permanent, and the only thing she could do now was unravel. The next morning I heard her pacing outside. I opened the blinds and saw her in all black, not funeral attire but battle wear. She clutched a legal pad, barking into the phone, "Just get me a lawyer who knows how to bury this. I don't care what it costs." She's just an old woman. I stepped onto the porch with my arms crossed. She froze when she saw me. I didn't say a word. She knew I had heard everything. 2 days later, we got a court date, a preliminary hearing to determine the will's validity, property ownership, legal residency status. Marissa showed up in a cream blazer, holding her fake ultrasound like a prop. Her attorney was gentle-voiced and overly sympathetic. He talked about grief, motherhood, and the emotional toll of living with a resentful in-law. Then Holt stood up and presented the notarized real will with metadata, the copied and altered draft from her laptop, the sonogram with a mismatched conception date, the refinanced documents with my name, the original deed with David's and mine, and screenshots of messages, digital file histories, and photographic proof of forgery. The judge leaned forward, reviewed the file, and said only 4 words. "This is extremely clear." Marissa's posture collapsed. Her hands trembled as the judge continued. "Temporary ownership freeze is lifted. Mrs. Elaine Monroe retains legal co-ownership. All eviction claims are void. The will submitted by Miss C is now under fraud investigation." Her attorney leaned over to whisper something. She looked at him like he had just betrayed her, but it wasn't betrayal. It was the end of the lie. As we exited the courtroom, Holt turned to me and said, "Now we wait to see if she pushes back or packs her bags." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because I had already won, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. That evening, back at the house, the rooms felt different, not empty, not full, but mine again. I opened the drawer in David's old desk, the one I hadn't dared touch since the funeral, and there it was. A single sheet of paper, folded and worn, David's handwriting, dated 3 weeks before he died. "If anything happens to me," it began, "I need you to know I'm sorry." I read each word slowly, how he felt her isolating him, how he tried to fix things, how he felt trapped, how he missed me but didn't know how to reach back, and finally, "This house was always ours, not hers. Do what you have to do, Mom." I held the letter to my chest, not because it hurt, but because it healed. Even in death, he had tried to give me the strength I would need. The morning after the hearing, the house was too quiet, not peaceful, not yet, but different. Like the kind of quiet after a hurricane where everything has stopped moving, yet you know the earth is still holding its breath. I walked into the kitchen. Madison was already there, black dress, hair pulled tight. A legal pad on the table filled with scribbled names and crossed-out numbers. She didn't look up when I entered. She didn't need to. She already knew she had lost. "You think you've won?" she said softly without turning her head. I poured my coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. "I didn't win," I said. "The truth did." That snapped something. She stood up so fast her chair screeched across the tile. "You don't get to steal everything from me," she spat. I turned to face her. "You tried to erase me from a home I helped build. You used lies, forged papers, even invented a pregnancy. And now you're angry that the truth still stood." She froze, her mouth open then closed. She didn't deny it because there was nothing left to deny. I added gently, "Pack your things. I'm giving you the same respect you never gave me. I'm not calling the sheriff yet." She stared at me. For a second I thought she might scream, cry, plead, but she didn't. She just grabbed her phone, her legal pad, and walked out the front door. The house settled behind her like it was exhaling for the first time. And for a while I just stood in the kitchen, sipping my coffee. It tasted like freedom. That afternoon she had 2 friends over. They carried boxes, whispered in the hallways. I stayed in my room, letting them say whatever they needed to say. I overheard one of them mutter, "She's insane. I don't know how you even lived here with her." I didn't reply. Some things aren't worth answering. The next morning, a voicemail came through. It was from Kyle, David's friend. He said, Hey, Elaine, just wanted to give you a heads up. Madison called me, left a message saying you fabricated the whole case. Said David never wanted you in the house, said you were abusing her emotionally. I just thought you should know. Then he added, but I've seen the court papers, I saw the letter, you don't need to explain anything. I texted him back with just one word, thank you. Thursday came and so did the end. Her car was packed. The hall outside her room lined with mismatched boxes, some with tape barely clinging on, others unlabeled and messy like she'd given up caring. She walked into the kitchen holding one last bag. You don't have to do this, she said, almost whispering. I looked at her, really looked, and replied, neither did you. Her lips parted like she expected something more. A speech, a scream, a moment of victory, but I gave her none of it. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore, it never really was. You can have your house back, she said bitterly. It was never yours to give, I answered. That one landed. She flinched, then turned around and walked toward the door. I didn't stop her, I didn't watch from the window, I just let the door close behind her and stayed still. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for footsteps, wasn't listening for whispers behind my back. I was just present. I unpacked the last of my things, put David's photo back on the hallway shelf, lit a candle in the kitchen, opened the windows. The wind carried a softness I hadn't felt since before the hospital call. I made tea. Sat at the table, alone but not lonely, and just when I thought the story had ended, I saw it. A small silver flash drive left on the coffee table, unlabeled, cold, shiny, too obvious to be forgotten. I stared at it for a long time. I could have thrown it out, ignored it, pretended I never saw it. But after everything, after all the lies, all the control, I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. I plugged it into David's old laptop. One folder, one file. Labeled Open Me, the video started with a slow flicker, then Marissa's face. She was in David's home office, sitting in his old chair, her tone calm, too calm. If you're watching this, she said, then I'm either gone or you think you've won. Her eyes narrowed, voice dropping. You were never supposed to stay here forever, Elaine. You were a placeholder, a guest who overstayed her welcome. I clenched my jaw, but I didn't stop the video. She leaned forward. David wanted to ask you to leave before he died. He just didn't have the guts. That was a lie and I knew it. Still, I let her finish. He couldn't cut the cord, so I had to do it for him. You can keep the house, but you'll never forget this. The screen went black. She thought that would haunt me, but what she didn't know was that I already had something stronger. David's handwritten letter, his real voice, his regret, his love, the part of him she could never fake or steal. I ejected the flash drive. Tossed it in the trash, not because I was afraid of it, but because it held no more power over me. The war was over, the house was quiet, and every room was mine again. I once read that the most dangerous moment in any conflict is the end. Because that's when the one who's lost has nothing left to protect, only something left to destroy. I didn't expect peace from Marissa, I expected the last move. And it came. It started with a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find a local reporter, clipboard in hand, face polite but eyes too curious. Hi, Miss Monroe, she said. We received a tip about an elder abuse case involving you. Would you be open to comment? I looked at her, blinked once, then said calmly, I think you've been misinformed. Please contact my attorney. Then I closed the door. I didn't need to guess where the tip came from. I didn't need to get angry, because the law was already louder than any whisper campaign she could launch. And people can believe rumors for a moment, but truth echoes longer. The next morning, I got a message from Holt. Marissa has filed a counter-statement. She's claiming emotional harassment, manipulation, and elder exploitation. But she submitted no evidence, and her attorney has already contacted us requesting settlement. Settlement. That word sat in my chest like a victory I didn't ask for. I wrote back, no, I want full court record. I don't want silence. I want accountability. Holt replied in minutes. Then we proceed. That same day, I received a thin envelope from the court. Inside, confirmation of full ownership co-recognition, pending fraud review against Marissa K. and a formal statement. All eviction attempts declared unlawful and retaliatory. My hands shook, not from fear but from relief. By now, the house was still. She had moved out, not just her things, but her scent, her presence, her power. But she'd left behind traces of herself in files, in shadows, in the architecture of my grief. Until I cleaned the final room, David's. I dusted the shelves, replaced the photos. Took down the canvas art she had hung to lighten the space. And behind the dresser, I found something tucked in the corner. A pair of old shoes, David's military boots, worn, stiff, scuffed at the heel. I held them for a long time, remembering. Not his death, but his voice, his kindness, his promise, this house was always ours, Mom. That night I walked barefoot through every room. I lit one candle in each space, not for ritual, not for healing, but for ownership. Not legal, not symbolic, but emotional. I whispered to the walls, I'm still here, you didn't win. The next morning, a neighbor stopped me on the porch. Elaine, she said softly. I didn't want to say anything until it was over, but we knew. All along, she wasn't what she seemed. I nodded, not with pride, but with quiet confirmation. I didn't have to prove anything, I said. I just had to endure long enough for the truth to do its work. She squeezed my hand. David would be proud. I looked out over the yard, sunlight cutting through the morning air, and whispered, I hope he is. A week passed, then two. No more letters, no more lawyers, no more voices behind closed doors, just silence. And birds. I planted herbs in the kitchen window, hung wind chimes on the back porch, rearranged the guest room for visiting friends, and every now and then I'd find a small remnant, a scuff on the baseboard, a note crumpled behind the couch, an empty picture frame. I left some. I threw some away, because healing doesn't mean erasing, it means choosing what deserves to stay. One day, I opened David's top drawer, the one I had finally come to see not as a wound but as a memory chest. Inside was a tiny velvet pouch. I opened it to find a ring, his graduation ring from the academy, and a note. Thought you might need this someday, in case the world ever makes you feel like you're not strong enough, you are. I smiled, a real smile, not one strained through fear or memory, but one born in clarity. That night I stood on the porch. The same porch where she had once delivered that whisper behind my shoulder, you have 1 week to get out. I looked into the dark and whispered back, you had your week, I have the rest of my life. There's something sacred about silence that you've earned. Not the silence of fear, not the kind forced upon you, but the kind you walk into with your chin held high, your story intact, and your soul intact too. That was the silence I woke up to every morning after she left. No more clicks of her heels on the tile, no more staged phone calls, no more shadows pacing outside my bedroom door, just sun filtering through the blinds, the hum of the fridge, the small creak of the back door when the breeze rolled in. And for the first time in months or maybe years, I didn't listen for danger, I listened for life. I began doing things slowly again, purposefully. I scrubbed the kitchen tiles by hand, reorganized the spice rack, cooked David's favorite stew and set 2 bowls on the table, one for me and one for the son I would always carry with me even in his absence. And I wrote, not a letter, not a journal, but a statement. A page I pinned to the inside of my closet. Just 6 words, my house, my rules, my peace. Some days I'd sit on the front steps with tea and wave to neighbors as they passed. The ones who once whispered in confusion now stopped to chat. They asked how I was doing, not out of pity but respect. I'm doing well, I said one morning to Mrs. Alvarez. The quiet suits me. She smiled, it's not just quiet, Elaine. It's yours now. I received a call from Holt a few weeks later. Probate court reviewed the signature discrepancies, he said. The will is now formally voided. Fraud investigation closed. All rights returned. I asked if I needed to do anything. No, he replied. You've already done everything that mattered. That night, I walked into the living room, the same room where she once whispered threats behind a wine glass. Now it held nothing but warmth. I had replaced the painting she hung, the cold, people-less landscape, with a photo of David fishing, his back turned to the camera, his silhouette against golden water, still alive in the light of memory. I lit a candle beneath it, not to mourn him, but to honor him. A week later, I received a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a small white envelope sealed with tape, no note. I opened it to find a single ultrasound photo. The same one she once placed on the kitchen table like a weapon. On the back, scribbled in rushed handwriting, I wasn't pregnant, I just wanted space, I'm sorry. I couldn't win any other way. No signature, no apology worth answering. I folded it, placed it inside an envelope of my own, labeled lessons, then locked it away. Some truths deserve remembering, others deserve closure. On a bright Sunday, I hosted brunch for a few friends. Real ones. People who had watched from a distance, unsure how to help. Now they sat at my kitchen table, eating fresh scones, telling stories about gardens, pets, the neighbors' grandkids. One of them, Carla, looked around and said, "The house feels different." "It should," I replied. "It's mine again." And not just in paperwork, but in every detail. The scent of the soap, the framed poem by the bathroom mirror. The wooden chime above the porch, the one David made in high school, finally rehung. That evening I sat in the hallway, legs stretched back against the wall where his photo hung. And I whispered the words I'd waited so long to say out loud. "We're safe now, baby, you can rest, and so can I." This wasn't just the end of a legal fight, it was the end of something much deeper, the end of doubt. The end of shrinking myself to keep someone else comfortable. The end of letting grief be used as leverage. I was no longer the woman who sat frozen at a funeral, crushed by loss and threats. I was no longer the invisible voice in a house that once pushed me to the margins. I was a survivor, a protector, a mother whose love could not be faked or buried. And when the wind moved through the curtains that night, I didn't flinch. I welcomed it because it carried only peace. No footsteps, no whispers, no lies, just home. And as I turned off the lights and stepped into bed, I whispered once more with all the steadiness I had earned, "My house. My rules." And finally, I slept with the window open. No door wedge,